seconds.
Are we moving it on the agenda?
Switch the ball.
Yeah. Who's doing that? What? Moving the item? He'll do it, yeah. Because I offered to do it. Oh, yeah.
Back on.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022. Please join me for a flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Present.
Mr. Knox,
Here.
Mr. Mosier,
Here.
Mr. Christensen,
Here.
Ms. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Himshoot,
Here.
and I believe Mr. Miller will be here momentarily.
Need batteries.
Great, thank you. Are there any correspondence or agenda changes this evening?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Knox is
Mr. Knox?
I'd like to request that we move item F up in the or a new business order of amending Title 22 to be considered first in the new business section there. Just before
Mr. Knox's request is to move item F as first item in the new business, under new business, putting item F before item D. Does anybody in the assembly oppose switching these items? Great, thank you. Sarah will be taking item F before D.
Thank you.
Any other correspondence or agenda changes this evening? Seeing none, there are no ceremonial matters. We do have a scheduled special report tonight. The introductions of the AFS 22-23 high school exchange students. Please.
Thank you.
Button on the very bottom.
Thank you. All right, thank you. My name is Christiane Weiss. I have been a long-standing volunteer with AFS USA intercultural exchange programs. We've hosted students before. It's one of my very favorite things to do. And tonight we are welcoming 4 new students. We just said goodbye to 4 in June, and now we're saying welcoming 4 more. I'll let them introduce themselves and who they're staying with. All 4 of them are on fully funded scholarships by the U.S. Department of State, scholarships that are available for them to come and study in the United States, and they're also available for U.S. kids to go study abroad. So I will let them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their initial impressions of our wonderful little town.
Hi, my name is Iman and I'm from Morocco. And this year I will be staying with the Jordans, and I have one host sister, Zoe. And today was the first day of school, and it was very fun. And I'm looking forward to having a great year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Una. I'm from Latvia, and this year I'm staying with the Christiansen family. Here's Thor. And I have 2 co-sisters, Rita and Ayu. And as far as I've seen, there's a lot of fog out there, but yeah, the weather is pretty interesting. But I'm looking forward for this year, and especially the school year.
And the weather stays interesting.
Hello, my name is Shadia. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I will be staying with Starbuck family, Luke and Ariel, as well as my 2 host siblings, Cedar and Rosie. I'm here 2 weeks and I really like the people, the city, everything, and I'm looking forward to meeting new people and having many more fun times here.
Great, welcome.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from Cameroon, and this year I'll stay with Belch, Nick, and Rachel Belch. And I have two siblings, Laura and Liv, and I like the weather of Sitka. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, and welcome to you four. Appreciate you choosing Sitka. I don't know if you can choose Sitka or not, but thank you for coming to Sitka for this school year. I hope that you'll find everything you needed out of your school year here and get quite the experience while we also get to learn from you while you come here. And I understand that you don't know our Pledge of Allegiance, but I thank you for the respective standing during that while everyone else did. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and welcome to Sitka, and enjoy your school year. All right, moving on to special reports. Is there any government report this evening? Municipal boards, commissions, committees? Municipal departments? School district? Students and guests? Yeah, this will bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for an item off of tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Hello, my name is Lisa Bush. I'm the executive director.
It didn't turn on.
Oh, it didn't?
Nope.
It's blinking. It's blinking. Can you hear me now?
Gotcha, thank you.
My name is Lisa Bush. I'm the executive director of the Sitka Sound Science Center. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is science research and science education for coastal Alaska. And I am super excited to be here tonight to unveil to you, our community, the new SitkaLandslide.org landslide warning system. You can access from your computer or your telephone, and that will tell you the risk of landslides in our area. First, I want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to the entire community. So many community members participated and gave us a lot of input into this project. To you, the Assembly, for all your encouragement and support. And to our partners, the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, the U.S. Forest Service, the Ranch Corporation, the State of Alaska, the University of Oregon, Oregon State, the National Weather Service, the U.S. Geologic Survey, the University of California, and Azavia. This project started in 2015 when some of our beloved community members were killed in a landslide. Suddenly, we all had a new anxiety about rain and landslides. And we went to the scientific community and asked, what questions can you answer to help us feel less anxious? 4 years ago, with your taxpayers' dollars, the National Science Foundation, we started in on this idea of developing a landslide warning system. And today, we have one that is accessible from the web and your phone. Again, SitkaLandslide.org. We wanted to let you know that the Science Center plans to maintain the system, the technical equipment in the field and the website, and to remind you that this was a system that was developed with a lot of community participation and participation from Assembly members as well, and in which community members told us that they want a system in which they can see for themselves what the risk of landslides is. We are now hoping to pass the baton to you, city leaders. We're science people. We are not experts in emergency planning. We know you have people who can do that kind of work. What the emergency planners are asking is that we tell people to develop a buddy system in the community, so in which you link households where you can go uphill to a household out of the way of a tsunami, and they can come downhill to a house outside of a landslide risk. And finally, the project may be finishing in Sitka, but we have linked up now with 6 other communities in the region, Yakutat, Hoonah, Skagway, Craig, Klukwan, and Kasan. And they are also interested in developing landside warning systems. So that's it, and thank you so much. Thanks again.
10 seconds to speak.
Hi there, my name is Patrick Davis, owner-operator of Sea Marine Wildlife Tours here in Sitka. I was born and raised here in Sitka. I'd like to reflect on some of the proposed comments made at the last assembly meeting as it relates to the vendor squares out front. I believe it is a misplaced conception in considering placing such a burden on the backs of local tour operators. One of the economic and fundamental drivers in tourism in our community is to find ways to take external money and turn it into internal money. The city of Sitka should be promoting and enhancing this. It is the city's job and responsibility to create an economy and income for its residents that live here. The reason why we are promoting tourism is to create a local economy for our residents and income for people that live here, such as me. The businesses that are at Harrigan Centennial Hall are the small, locally owned entrepreneurial businesses, and you're asking to put a disproportionate burden on the little guys. Resident licensed businesses only should be allowed a space in which to sell from at a reasonable rate. One of your jobs here is to create an economy and income for the families and residents of Sitka that live here. Harrigan Centennial Hall has long served as our main hub for cruise ship passengers to disperse quality visitor experience and equitable access to tour operators and vendors of all sizes. Equitable, in my book, means dealing fairly and equally with all concerned. A competitive bidding process amongst locals does not facilitate equitable. As it relates to Juneau, there was some discussion about some squares that were presented by Mr. Leach. The vast majority of the city of Juneau has brokerage permits, meaning there are at least 10 plus different tour companies pooling for the cost of a permit in Juneau. Mr. Leach pointed out there was $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for a space. Well, these are brokerage spaces. So there's no comparison between Juneau and the city of Sitka with us independent little tour
In
operators.
fairness to everybody, we're gonna have to stop you at 3 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you, appreciate your comments this evening.
okay, thank you.
Push the button.
Yep, it's working, thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Dawn Thompson, and I'm not a vendor, but I also came to speak in opposition to the increased vendor fees. So I've been reading the proposal by the consultant, and I have some pretty significant concerns, some of which echo Mr. Davis. A lot of folks are turning to Juneau and Skagway as examples, and I would like to put on the record that most of us live here because we don't want to be Juneau and Skagway, and if anything, we should look at them as examples of what not to do and take lessons learned of what they didn't put in place to protect their economies when the cruise ships came in, and particularly to protect their local business people. And so the vendor's fee that's being proposed to increase from $400 to $5,000 is over 1,000% increase. If anybody was proposing to increase our taxes or our fees by over $1,000, people would lose their minds. And that seems incredibly inequitable to try and put the burden on any of our vendors. We don't doubt that the prices have increased and the costs are significantly increased, but it's increased by the number of visitors that we have coming here. And I would propose that our consultant go back and be a little bit more creative about finding ways to put the burden on the individual by number, number of people in the bus. I know that it becomes a little more complicated with the tonnage per visitor coming off the ship, but we could also increase that $5. There's different ways to put it on the actual numerical person arriving, or the numerical person going on the bus, numerical person going on the tours, etc. And then two last things. One, on the short-term rental restrictions that you guys are voting on. I think that's super. I think that we should be even more restrictive.
And this is for items off of the agenda. You'll
Oh,
have
so
an
I can't talk
opportunity
to that.
speak to
Sorry.
that
Okay.
when it comes
So
up.
then the other one not on the agenda.
Perfect, thank you.
Is downtown business district licenses being restricted to residents. So a lot of towns like us that have really significant tourism have been overtaken, like Juneau, with out-of-town businesses because cruise ships are very smart, right? And they want to keep the dollar within their own company, and so they buy up the businesses and then send people to their own businesses and keep the dollar within their own companies, and then therefore the dollars don't come into Sitka. And so a lot of local towns with large tourism have residency requirements for the licenses, and they zone them for their downtown area. So I would just recommend that we think about that as well to protect our local entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Good evening, Sitka. My name is Richard Wien. Sitka is an island which is completely dependent for all its goods and services on fossil fuels. I agree with Ms. Thompson and Mr. Davis that it is very important to consider other options. One of the things that you see is that it was mentioned by the consultant that they had been working for 4 months, but yet people were crowded here last time, and we hear other individuals coming here. And sometimes it seems as though the word doesn't get out, but we hear time and time again it does. And sometimes having a preview of ordinance may help people come out and voice appropriate opinions. There are many different ways that we can approach this from a financial point of view, and I think it's important to consider it and not to rush in to something per se. It's a good idea to have people pay their fair share and have our Centennial Hall be able to meet their needs. But what happens is it's not uniform across the board on making people meet the needs. And it needs to be rethought, especially as it relates to local vendors. Other things that I'd like to bring up, my new word, and I may get a tattoo, is going to be FERC. I certainly would like to hear a report about Blue Lake FERC and what is its status. Another thing is, I certainly haven't forgotten about the assessors and the utilization of the same assessor for Sitka Community Hospital. That still strikes me as a head shake, a wow, and an eye roll. Another thing is, I certainly would like to hear a status update on water sales. We made a big deal and we gave away water rights from here until eternity, and I'm not talking the movie, I'm talking Sitka Water, and I think it's important that we do get an update on some of these very important things. So many things that hit the assembly table are just kind of washed away with the tide, and we do not reconsider them or their implications until, like Blatchley Medical School heat pumps, that years later we realize that there is a definite problem. And I do have to say it is with great interest that Mr. Fauci is no longer sitting in his perch and will be resigning. And I think people need to try to understand why this is happening, and to note that I still read the primary literature as it relates to COVID and all these other aspects, and I find that you need to as well.
Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening? All right, seeing none, that'll bring us to consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda consisting of A, approve the August 9th Assembly meeting minutes.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Is there any public comment? Sarah, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes?
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
and Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0 on item A.
Just take a second. Brings us to board, commission, and committee appointments. Item B, please.
I move to reappoint Stacy Mudry to a 3-year term on the planning commission.
Has been moved and seconded to reappoint. Is there any public comment?
My name is Richard Weems. Good evening, Sitka. One thing I have to say about Stacy Mudry, she is a brave, strong woman who wants to re-up for planning, and I wish to thank her very much. She is an important business entity. She runs an important business entity in Sitka and has contributed to the planning commission for many years. So God bless you for upping up again, and I think that your performance and interest on the planning commission speaks for itself. So thank you.
Is there any other public comment on the reappointment? Assembly deliberation? Or
I just want to say it's been a real pleasure working with her the last couple of years. She seems to bring a really nice, thoughtful consideration to the meeting, so I will enthusiastically be supporting this.
anything else from the assembly? Sarah?
Okay, on a motion to reappoint Ms. Mudry, Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
and Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
That'll bring us to unfinished business, item C, which is a substitute ordinance. The assembly had tabled this ordinance to have it come back in a modified form as opposed to working at it on the table. And here is our modified version. So item C, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2022-16S on first reading, amending Title II Administration of the City General Code by adding Chapter 2.15 Sustainability Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Before public comment, do either of the co-sponsors have a brief introduction of some of the changes that were made, or do we want to just roll into debate?
I'll be brief. At the last meeting, there was some, Brian wasn't available, and so I kind of made my best guess because there was suggestions made to change it that I felt that he would have decided were substantial changes. So rather than trying to push it through at first reading, I decided to pull it. I worked with Ms. Himshoot and with his legal, Brian helped us out. So I feel like we've captured what the concerns of the assembly they brought up, and I'm hoping we will be passing. That's what it was. Thank you.
Is there any public comment on ordinance 22-16S?
Good evening, Sitka. This is Richard Weem. This is item C concerning the Sustainability Commission. In essence, it's creating the commission and transitioning from the Climate Change Task Force in reading through the ordinance, it is, if they can accomplish everything that they do, we won't need an assembly. Because they are supposed to deal with the social, environmental, and economic sustainability of the city, which sounds like what the assembly should be doing. It's important to note that they will set up a list of goals, and this will be done annually, which they will present to the assembly for evaluation. An important thing is that some of the annual goals should be the development of local renewable energy sources. So when I see that, I say, great, we're going to start logging and make chips to use the chip-type furnaces, because nothing is more renewable than forests, potentially. We will also, as part of their annual duty, is to try to decrease supply chain fragility. And I read about that in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal and everything every day, and I really wish that that can be done. Sitka is an island, and I think no matter what, we will always have a certain fragility, but I wish them very well. Obviously, there's food security enhancement. I think that's something that is very important, which we really have not, even though we discussed it, it hasn't really been brought to a forefront where there are real solutions. And another thing, which is near and dear to my heart, is that I hope finally we will get a comprehensive solid waste plan, which is something that has been talked about for many, many, many years. So if they can do it, well, bless them. One interesting thing, though, is I found on line 91 is that people serve at the pleasure of the commission. Maybe I misinterpreted that, but I thought that people serve at the pleasure of the assembly. Just to the community to note, there are several members which are appointed by the assembly from a diverse cross-section of the community. So wish them wonderful luck. And like I said, if you succeed, we will be able to disband the assembly because you will be performing their function. So thank you very much.
Carol Boyson, Sitka. Kate Christ sent each of you some suggestions in an email that add clarity to the description and deletes some redundancy in the actual ordinance. So I trust that you will adopt some of her suggestions. In researching in the city code, Sitka's commissions and committees, it is clear to me, as Assembly member Crystal Duncan stated 2 meetings ago, that the Sustainability Commission is very similar to the Health Needs and Human Services Commission, wherein both commissions serve at the pleasure of the Assembly. This is in contrast to committees that clearly serve at the pleasure of the administrator, as the climate task force did, reporting all recommendations to him and for him to carry to the Assembly. The Sustainability Commission serves at the pleasure of the Assembly, to whom it presents goals and an annual report. This is a significant transition for the city to identify sustainability as one of its 5, now hopefully 6th commission. I commend the Assembly for this forward-looking action in bringing sustainability to the forefront of your work as the Assembly and to the awareness of citizens. Thank you to Assembly members Hemschuk and Mosier for the good work in writing this ordinance and especially in listening to citizens' input. For all that, thank you.
Riley, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Climate Action Task Force. And first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to serve on the Climate Action Task Force. As a reminder, we were formed in November of 2020. And since then, we have learned an awful lot about what Sitkans are hoping for a sustainable future for ourselves and our planet. And we've learned an awful lot about the best processes to use to move things forward. So one of those things is moving from a task force to the commission, which you all have learned through this ordinance that Katie Riley, the vice chair, and myself worked really closely with Assembly members Tim Shute and Mosier on this ordinance. So we just want to take the time to thank you so much for your work, for the work of the city staff, especially the legal team, Ryan and his team, on reviewing and making sure that the ordinance was aligned with the city's goals and all the legal requirements. And I wanted to voice my support for morphing the task force into a commission that can be longstanding and continue to have great impacts for the rest of Sitka. Thanks much.
Good evening, Assembly members. I am Katie Riley, Vice Chair of the Climate Action Task Force. I'd like to thank you all for deliberating on this ordinance tonight, and especially for Assembly members Mosier and Hinchett for moving it forward. I really appreciate this dedication to continued action on climate change that our community has invested in through several recent investments, including new budgeting for a sustainability coordinator, passing several resolutions in support of increasing our renewable energy supply, decarbonizing municipal operations, and I think this is the logical next step to continue to support municipal action on climate change. One of the components of the original resolution that created the task force in 2020 was the intent to transition it to a commission in due time. And I think that that really spoke to, the ongoing long-term nature of the climate crisis. This is not something that we can write a report on, make some suggestions and say, cool, we dealt with it. This is something that our community is going to be dealing with, and my generation and the generations that come after me for all of the years to come. This is the reality now. So I think that creating a commission is our municipality's way to support continued action on this, and I think that lack of moving forward on this resolution is a dereliction of duty for this body and its commitment to the future of this community. So I want to thank you all for moving this forward, and I think that there's a lot of exciting opportunities ahead, especially through the federal funding that's coming down in the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and we are posed to really take advantage of that by having a great body of citizens that are putting in their volunteer time to support our community to become a more sustainable place. So thank you for considering this tonight.
Anyone else on ordinance 22-16S? Back to the assembly for deliberation. Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the last two people who spoke, persons be heard, and we have worked with them extensively, and they've been extremely helpful, and they've been a very huge blessing to this community and their service on the Climate Action Task Force. The purpose of this is to change, to basically sunset the Climate Action Task Force, and turn this into a long-term permanent commission that will be working on this. The purpose of this commission is to help the Assembly with these kind of issues, with their expertise, hopefully from a wide variety of backgrounds. Just some comments have been made, and we try to keep this generally kind of loose, so to speak. We didn't want to say things have to be, like these are definitely things we have to look for. It kind of gives some guidelines so that people will be free to present goals, and that goes down to some of the things that the Assembly brought up at the last, on the 27th. There was three main things. One was on line, on section B, line 116, number 6, solid waste consumption, reduction, composting, recycling, and reuse. That was worded slightly differently. I believe the mayor wanted that kind of changed a little bit, so we did change it. It's not a substantial change. The second issue that some of the members brought up was the reporting to the assembly annually, and we did a little research, and the only other commission that does that is the Health Needs and Human Services. However, we did add that, and it reads here from line 123 and 125. Concurrently with presenting goals to the Assembly, the Commission will submit a report to the Assembly on progress towards the previous year's goals and other activities which were approved and directed by the Assembly. I believe that fulfills the desire there. And then I'm not going to read section C, but that was the third and final issue. Basically, we wrote it in a way that, because commissions generally don't spend money, so if a commission wants to have expertise come that will cost money, they would have to come to the Assembly or get Assembly members to bring an appropriation to pay for that. But it also clarifies they're free to get volunteer experts to come and speak at their meetings at any time, and they don't have to get permission from the Assembly for that, as long as it's free. That's kind of what we addressed, and I hope that satisfies people's concerns. I think this is a good ordinance. It's taken a lot of hard work, and I really appreciate everyone who's been a part of that, supporting this. I think this could be a good thing for many of the reasons that people mentioned. Thank you.
Anything, Dora?
Yeah, I just want to express my appreciation for putting this together. I think it's, especially a commission like this, kind of, it's dependent on the people who are in it, and they're going to be the drivers in a lot of ways, which is nice because, you get the people who care about a subject working on it. And this is obviously a very important subject. We all know about it. So, I know they've got a laundry list of possible goals, but it's more the way I expect this to work is when they first start, essentially coming up with a plan for that year. And you're not going to work on everything all at once, of course, but the more minds you get attacking a problem and hashing out the solutions that frankly don't work very well at the assembly table to try and do that. So I appreciate you guys putting this together, and I also appreciate the people on the Climate Action Task Force who are willing to move over to a more long-term commission. And I fully expect them to come up with some ideas and plans that are going to help us become more sustainable, that help us become cleaner. And I look forward to seeing that, and I'll cheer them on. So thank you guys. Crystal?
Question about the organization. Did we make any changes from the last?
The organization of the structure?
Yeah.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so then something new stood out to me. So it's very similar to Health Needs and Human Services, and then it says you'll appoint a chair, vice chair, and secretary. But it looks like this appointed secretary, which would be a commission member, they are tasked to provide the meeting minutes to the clerk. Currently, the task force, they have a staff member who does that, right? So fiscal note, we're actually returning a staff person who will no longer have to staff or provide that guidance. So are there other commissions that are doing meeting minutes?
Yep, we have other commissions, we're members.
Which one? I'm not familiar.
Let's see, Training Landscape, yep, Library Commission. There might be more.
The historical commission?
No, they do have a secretary designated, but that person is just, those duties have not always been fulfilled by the secretary on that commission.
Okay.
And so the hope was to deliberately return Jessica back to other duties within, is that why we said that a secretary within the commission would take on that?
Yes.
I appreciate this group. You've got some great ideas and some great things coming up, and I think it's awesome. I think this is one of the most, one of the things that can really help our community in the long run. If we can use less oil, if we can do a lot of those things, figure out our garbage problems. I mean, those are some great issues. I don't think they're going to happen overnight, but I think that they have great potential. My hope is that I think in a lot of the issues that you are involved in, there are 1,001 different ways to look at them. And no matter who you talk to, it's got some little version of a different way of doing it. And I can only think of the wind turbine things, right, for some reason. Whether you get the wind, if we ever talk about wind turbines, I don't know. Whether you get the ones that go this way or the ones that go this way that I'm seeing now across the country, or you get the small ones that are each individual house. There are a million ways to look at everything. And I know it will happen, and I'm just saying it because it's my hope, is that you look at every one of those ways when you do it. Because if you use wind turbines as an example, I've got, I think, 3 emails now on wind turbines. And, we should have them, we shouldn't have them, this is why we shouldn't have them, this is why we should have them. And I think there's a million ways to look at everything, and we have to look at every one of them to make sure it works for us. That's all I ask, and I wish you the best of luck in all of that. Thanks.
So I have just a couple, perhaps, Blair, just housekeeping.
He won't leave his hand up, but he keeps raising his hand.
Kevin, go ahead.
Oh, you can go ahead. I was just waiting in line.
All right, a couple of just small housekeeping type items on here. Sarah, anytime that city and borough is used, does that need to be capitalized?
Brian's smiling. Brian, would you like to get the answer?
Or Brian, please. I didn't realize it was quite to this level.
It's a conversation anyway. Yeah, I'll look at the answer.
If you read our entire code, city and borough is not capitalized. If you read the entire code, the code company will, when we send it to them, they'll take the capitalization and turn it into lowercase on it. I would argue that you should have it, but for the sake of consistency with a long developed code, it's become our practice to follow the way it's been put in the code in the past. So we're
okay. I just noticed it, and I understand city and borough is a designation of status, and thought perhaps that it was to be. But if it is appropriate as is, then great. And then the only other thing that I saw on line 116, number 6, I'm not looking to consume solid waste. With solid waste consumption, perhaps they're an English person. What is the appropriate? How do we separate solid waste and
Generation. Are you looking at the production of
Well, I don't want to me it reads solid waste consumption, and I don't want to consume it. I want to reduce. So I don't know, is there a proper, like a comma or a semicolon or something that goes in there to, solid waste is the main overarching goal, and you want to do the rest of those items? Or am I looking way too into that as well?
If I may, if you started out on like the lines 102 and 102, and the idea is like the appropriate goals are generally based on topics that include solid waste consumption, reduction, composite. So it makes more sense in my mind if you kind of, these bullet points are continuations of that sentence. I'll stop with the wordsmithing.
Everyone else kind of agree on that one?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay. Yeah, since that was the one thing that I had wanted put in there, I read that a couple times to make sure that it looked good. So, and then just want to wrap up by saying, Thank you to the co-sponsors for taking this back and working on it. This is a good ordinance. This is a really good ordinance that you put in front of us. I also like the deliberative process that took place where we brought it before the body. We listened and built consensus at the table, and then we took it back, revised it, and then have brought it forward again for the public and ourselves to look at and make sure that this is an ordinance that the town wants to see go forward. So I'm appreciative of the process in this and hoping that future processes can go a similar direction instead of a long-standing debate at the table. A process where we work on it, we build a consensus, and then we edit off the table or offline if need be. So thank you to the sponsors for taking that on. I'm extremely happy with the process and then the outcome. Of course, we could probably nitpick it to death as I've tried to do tonight, but do we actually get anywhere? Kevin?
Yeah, you stole some of the words right out of my mouth there too, but one in particular I was really appreciative of the rewrite on section C. One of my main concerns in the beginning with it was the task force or the commission anyway, having come back to the assembly for a number of different things. I think this opens their plate up a little bit to do some great work and then come forward on an annual basis or on a basis when they feel like it would be wise for the assembly to weigh in, or if there was some sort of ask for money or something like that. So I thank you guys for working on
that. Rebecca?
Yeah, and it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that much of this came from the task force. We asked them to figure out how to transition to a commission, and they kind of created the language. So I would love to take credit for it, but I don't think either one of us can really claim any credit. So that goes to the chair and vice chair of the task force.
Agreed. Understood. I extend my thanks to them as well, since they are in the crowd. Anything further from the assembly this evening? Sarah, on item C.
Okay, on motion to approve ordinance 2022-16S on first reading, Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbies?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Timshut?
Yes.
Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Yes.
And Mr. Mosier?
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on first reading.
And then quick poll of the assembly. We are before the hour, but I have a feeling our first new business item might take a while. Do we want to break before that? Sure. Okay. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll jump into new business. Thank you. Either of the sponsors like to briefly introduce this before we go to public comment?
Kevin, did you want to do that?
Kevin?
Sure. So we brought this forward after getting a significant amount of feedback at the town hall that we hosted on these items. We got a lot of great comments and a lot of people expressing a desire to be able to consider this as an option to address the short-term rentals that we have in town and the allowance for them, and giving the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, also some more tools to work with as well. So that's why we had a draft. And we're looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on ordinance 22-21?
Hi, Assembly members, Wendy Alderson. I'm on the Planning Commission. I have been out of town until just yesterday on family stuff. I'm sorry I wasn't at the last Planning Commission meeting. The vote would have been 4-1 in favor of supporting this had I been there. When the temporary moratorium on conditional use permits for short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods narrowly failed in March, those of you who chose not to move it forward were vocal in your support for looking into reasonable code changes. At the following roundtable, there were concerns expressed on both sides of the issue. Those who felt short-term rentals should be prohibited in residential neighborhoods stated concerns about short-term rentals driving up house values and having a negative impact on the price of rent, and the availability of long-term rentals. Also of concern was the possibility of Sitka becoming adversely affected by outside interests investing in and owning multiple standalone short-term rentals. Those who spoke in favor of short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods mentioned how an attached short-term rental could help them pay the mortgage, generating income while still being available for family and friends, or could provide an income stream when they were traveling or fishing for part of the year. There was a lot of common ground. It seems that most Sitkans who have weighed in on the issue feel that there is room for short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, as long as there are some reasonable criteria. I think these code changes represent what a broad base of Sitkans feel is appropriate. They allow Sitka residents to benefit from short-term rental income while keeping residential neighborhoods residential and allowing locals to maintain some control of these neighborhoods. You Assembly members enthusiastically endorsed a work group to move the conversation forward. This is the result. Thank you, Kevin and Kevin, for following through. I hope you all support these reasonable changes. Thank you.
Yes, please.
My name is Maria Hanlon. I support the motion and want to say that common sense regulations on short-term rentals have been in discussion for 2 years now, and this ordinance will, it's an ordinance, will implement the most widely agreed upon and concrete doable changes to the permit conditions. And I think anyone would look at these changes and say, yes, these are reasonable conditions that somebody should meet if they want to Airbnb a house in Sitka where housing is scarce. If the motion passes, it will be the first action that we've taken to regulate short-term rentals in residential zones, and that's why I'm in support. Thank you.
I'm Randy Huey, and I support this ordinance. This is good work. So thanks to Kevin and Wendy and Katie for persisting and bringing forth an ordinance which addresses narrowly the things I think are most critical to be done. So good work, and I'm all for this. I hope the Assembly will pass this.
Hello, this is Katie Riley. Thank you for letting me speak in support of this ordinance. I really appreciate the work of the Assembly members, Mosher and Knox, for shepherding this through and doing the hard work after the moratorium failed in March to follow through on, what I think was some excellent gathering of community input for these regulations. I think they did a great job with the town hall and put this together in what was requested by the Assembly, like a short, quick timeline that still had a lot of opportunity for public comment. So great job to you two for putting that together, and happy to support those efforts. I think that these regulations strike a great balance between protecting residential areas and affordable housing stock and residents' ability to generate an income from their property. These two restrictions, the primary residence and the sunset upon the sale of the property, were the most heavily supported throughout the community survey on short-term rentals that took place back in May of 2021, as well as the town hall that occurred this spring. So we've seen long and enduring support for these common sense regulations, and I think that they're going to help protect the integrity of our community in the long and short run. To me, this ordinance is an investment in our community and our housing stock. I think the Assembly talks a lot about how they can support affordable housing and how they can make sure that Sitkans have housing, but I know it's a super complicated issue, and unfortunately we don't see a lot of movement on it from this body, probably because it is such a complicated issue. So this is only one part of the puzzle, but I think it's a really important one, and I'm really glad that our community is leading on this issue as more Southeast Alaskan communities face it. I think that this ordinance, keeps residential areas for being used how they are intended to be used, which is for residential homes and not commercial property, while again protecting Sitkans' right to make income off their property and the extra spaces that they may have. So I hope to see this passed tonight. I'm really glad to have the Planning Commission have supported it at the past meeting, and thank you for considering it.
Good evening, Sitka.
Point of
Richard
order,
Reed.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
When we're being addressed under persons to be heard, I believe the comment should be directed to the assembly. Am I incorrect in that?
My research does indicate that members of the public are to address the assembly. Sir, in your future comments, if you could address the assembly as opposed to Sitka, please, thank you.
Well, I'm just saying good evening, sir. That's all. I'm not addressing Sitka. I am addressing the assembly.
Correct, you are, and thank you for your cooperation.
And thank you very much, Mayor Eisenreitz. We are here discussing the zoning updating for short-term rentals. In reviewing this, I do have some questions. If you look at note 2, which is deleted, it says that case law follows conditional use permits and are grants to the property and run with the parcel and not the owner. So I didn't know whether case law has changed, and because within this ordinance there are sunsets on B&Bs and short-term rentals. So I certainly think this type of thing needs to be addressed, because this was specifically pointed out about case law, and it was done so, I'm sure, for a reason. The other aspect is because the conditional use permit will not be following the property. If you have a B&B, you kind of constructed your property around this type of service, and so if you make a sale, it would be common sense and logical that the individual would be selling their business as well as their property. So I think that some of these aspects need to be considered in how this will work out, because if it doesn't, it may inhibit the ability to pass property in some reasonable way. New definitions in this are that instead of 14 days, it is now less than 30 days. And so one thing that I would like to hear the assembly, yes, I am addressing you guys, is that it was said just a moment ago that this ordinance addresses things most critical. So I was wondering if you could do the courtesy in elucidating and enumerating all of these critical things and what might the, I'll say, what are the good things that will happen from this, and what are the inhibitions that will happen for this. I know that when people are so happy that this is going to happen, I have to say, great, but there are always the consequences of good intentions. So if they could elucidate that, that would be appropriate. So, and I guess it would be inappropriate for me to say good night, Sitka. So, thank you.
Is there any other public comment on the ordinance?
Good evening, Assembly. I am Victoria O'Connell-Curran. Thank you for the opportunity. I support this ordinance and request that you do the same. I think it is narrow but a meaningful step in maintaining the integrity of our residential neighborhoods. On July 22nd in 2021, Pew Trust published the results of a study that shows that fully 1/4 of all single-family homes nationally were bought by investors last year. 1/4. That's up, it has been 15% since 2012. In Alaska, there was a 37% increase last year, up to 17%. So that's investors buying family homes, not available debt for families. I'd like to thank Kevin Knox and Kevin Lozier for keeping this important issue moving forward. I know it's difficult. And I would say please vote yes for this. I was really impressed that the Planning Commission voted for it, and let's support them and move it forward. And as someone that lives in a neighborhood with a lot of short-term rentals, and there are commercial zones, and if we're worried about businesses, the integrity of a business being able to move into perpetuity, maybe we could, that's a different conversation, but residential zone is a residential zone. So I think this is a small step, but a meaningful step, and I very much hope that you will support it. Thank you.
Anyone else on 22-21? Back to the assembly for deliberation. Kevin?
Kevin, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So a lot has already been said about this. We tried to do a moratorium basically so that we could work on a few things. This being, in my mind, the primary part of it, or what we came up with. But we did do a town hall, which Ms. Riley ran for us. It was very successful. A lot of comment, and so a lot of what we have here is taken from that. So basically there's three main things here. It is the definition of short-term rental. We changed that from 14 to 30 days. That's just a code cleanup. No transfer with the sale of the property, and then the residency requirement. The main purpose of this is to prevent that kind of what Ms. O'Connell is alluding to, is outside entities buying properties in Sitka up with no intention of living in them. That takes housing stock off the market, and makes it much harder for people to find places to live. Even recent applications, like the last planning commission, there was two that were approved, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, or was it three? Was it two? One of them would have been not accepted under this. So I don't really feel like I need to expound too much on this. This is a very, very important thing. It is a first step. It's not the end, but it's the beginning. But it's absolutely crucial to prevent this from happening before it happens. Because it already is starting to happen. And that's it for me for now.
Kevin Knox?
Yeah, so the other clarifications that I think are worthy of noting, that this really only applies to short-term rental permits. It does not affect the issuance of a bed and breakfast permit. The difference between short-term rental and B&Bs being that short-term rental is a standalone unit, something that has full or kitchen, bathroom, and a living space, where a B&B permit allows for people to open up their home as a business and just have a room that they can rent out. So those are very different things there. And Kevin pointed out the change on the 30 days instead of less than 14. It is a code cleanup. Our bed tax is based on anything that's rented over 30 days or under 30 days. Anything that's rented over 30 days is considered a long-term rental. So this just cleans up our code so that we're consistent with our bed tax. The rest of it really all resides in that new section F. And Kevin did a fine job in pointing out where we were kind of leaning with a lot of that. And again, like I said earlier, these were some of the biggest things and the most mentioned things at the town hall when we had our boards up and people were writing down different ideas. These were some of the ones that received some of the highest level of comment. So that's why we brought it forward like this.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a kind of an early look at this at the planning commission meeting last meeting, And there's a few things I've been writing notes here, but it was interesting, yes, there were two up. And one of them would have been okay with this after this, and one of them wouldn't. And I know that, you know, I wasn't the only one feeling a little uncomfortable with the outside, people from outside who weren't living there. Other than the fact they didn't like the idea of somebody outside having it, there was no legitimate reason to turn it down. And one of the things you guys haven't mentioned in here is the definition of living there, which is a little bit different in that it's 180 days a year. So the people who were doing the other one, they have a cabin on an island, and they're supposedly only going to live in it in the winter, in the summer, and they're going to go out and live in their cabin in the summer and rent their place out some. And they still fit the definition because they live there more than 180 days a year. So there's some flexibility there. And so it's not just a case where you have to have a little apartment that you can do it. You can make, or some people go fishing, for instance, over the summer. They would still be able to rent their place out while they're out fishing. You know, this is interesting. I think that it's, you know, part of the reason I was uncomfortable with the moratorium was that it didn't take into account people who need to make some extra income to make their mortgage. And one of the, you know, unintended or consequences of this, I hope, is that I could see people being more, looking more to doing an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, because then they can rent it out as a short-term rental. But I think it's also interesting to note that quite often short-term rentals come off the rolls because it's honestly more work than most people are willing to do. So I suspect we're going to be seeing more ADUs as long-term rentals as people build all these ADUs thinking they're going to do short-term rentals and realize, okay, that's a lot of work, I'll just rent it out. So I think it actually may wind up in another way producing more long-term rentals. So, you know, I'm not too concerned about the transferability. I mean, the new owners have every right to apply for a new permit, and as long, I think it's a nice way to look at a property again when it changes hands, because one of the issues with short-term rentals and other things like this is, well, the city is trying, and we've got our new compliance officer coming on board, trying to look at our people being good citizens, good renters. If when they change hands, it will be, well, was that property working well as long before? So I think this is a good step. I mean, I sometimes get a little uncomfortable about telling people what they can do with their property, but again, this is only in R1, R2, and other residential areas. This isn't commercial, you know, so I'll be voting for this, and thank you guys for putting the work in.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm hoping that you'll allow me the liberty of reading a couple paragraphs on the news story that I heard tonight. One paragraph is about Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And it reads, Steamboat Springs is part of a wave of vacation towns across the country facing a housing crisis and grappling with how to regulate the industry they point to as a culprit. Short-term rentals, such as those booked through Airbnb and VRBO, that have squeezed small towns' limited housing supply and sent rents skyrocketing for full-time residents. And to me, that sounded a lot like Sitka, with the exception that in Sitka, we can't drive to another town. So not only are we squeezed, we're squeezed and we're finite. We can't just have people who want to work here come from somewhere else. And then another paragraph that I thought was important was, in June, the Steamboat Springs City Council passed a ban on new short-term rentals in most of town, and a ballot measure to tax the industry at 9% to fund affordable housing. Parts of that paragraph might be a good idea, and parts of that paragraph kind of scare me. And then the story goes on and talks about people who are pushing back against it, saying, you know, short-term rentals bring a lot of money to town. And that some larger cities like Denver and Boston have stricter regulations like banning vacation rentals in homes that aren't also the owner's primary residences. So Sitka is right there on the cutting edge with other places that have a lot of visitors to town. And I think these are some really good moves that are fairly straightforward. And there's probably more that we need to do, but this is a really good start. So I appreciate that Kevin's bringing it forward after the moratorium that we didn't support. Going ahead with what you were planning to do with without the moratorium is, I appreciate that commitment.
Dave?
I think I've read it right. I just want to make sure this is not going to affect any short-term rentals that we have right now. We're not going to, pass this as an ordinance September, whatever, and then that day, the 70 or so that we have are gone. Those are okay as long as we're going to grandfather them in until they expire or whatever.
As long as they have a rental every year.
As long as they have a rental every year, as long as they follow through, okay. I just want to make sure.
Crystal?
Related to that question though, if there's a local resident who has more than one, so they have a number of units, they have to now be the primary resident if they apply for another one, correct? So if they own multiple houses and they use those as short-term rentals, this caps that they cannot add to that.
That would be correct.
Okay. I have questions, I'm supportive of this, but I do have questions related to it. The first one has to do with tracking and enforceability of primary residence. That seems like that would be difficult. I did see the note about 180 days, which makes allowances for quite a few people to fit within that. Who makes that determination, and do we have the capacity to track it within the city? Open to anyone.
So we don't, this is the first step of starting this. We do have a compliance officer, and that person's gonna have a lot on his or her plate without even dealing with this. So, yeah, we don't have anyone off top of our heads to be able to handle this, but we're working on it. We're not just gonna like say, pass this and then just fall asleep. It's not my intention about that.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that position, and I was thinking that they already have their hands full. So I guess enforceability is always something that we discuss is in relation to ordinances that we're passing. And I feel like this, with that 180-day window, it would be difficult to, I don't know if it's as simple as pulling up the books and saying, here are the short-term rentals, here are the multiple owners, or here are the new owners who are primary residents at this address. But they go away for example, tours go away in the wintertime, or go away in the, stay here in the wintertime, go away in the summertime. That feels difficult to track. I guess we don't need the answers to that, but that would be a concern that I have, just based on how it reads to me. The second one is in relations to the granting an exception. I know that you guys, when you compose and you bring this forward, you have an idea in mind, and again, I'm thinking back to that 180 days. What would be an exception where somebody could come before the planning commission? Do you have an example, a real world example where this might come up?
Kevin, you want to take this one?
You're talking about the hardship clause?
Yeah.
Say if somebody has to go south for medical treatment, that would put them outside of their 180 days. Or go to take care of a sick family member or something like that. They could, apply for or put the request in with the planning commission, and the planning commission then grants them the hardship clause to, up to 12 months in the first granting, and then they can apply for an extension of another 6 months to be gone for 18 total months, if possible or necessary, before they would have to give up the short-term rental.
Okay.
So if somebody say, you had to go and take care of a sick parent, and you didn't want to sell your home, you weren't sure about putting it on the long-term market because you weren't sure about how long you were going to be gone. You go to the planning commission, request the hardship, and then you could be gone. Like I said, up to 18 months.
So the health makes complete sense to me. It also lists employment. So employment may take you away for up to 180 days. That was listed in there. Is that another valid reason that we see granting an exception?
We have employers in Sitka that sometimes move staff around on a temporary basis, or one of the examples that comes to mind for me that I know of happening somewhat recently is somebody has to do a short-term, a Coast Guard member has to do a short stint outside of Sitka, but they're going to finish and they want to return to Sitka as their primary residence after they are done within the Coast Guard. So, this could be an opportunity there for them too.
Okay. And then I think the last question pertained to the case law on parcels and erasing note number 2. If you could speak to that, Brian, I have that same kind of question with regards to whether or not that has changed and that's why we removed it.
I don't want to second guess why they put that in there before, but what it essentially is saying that if your ordinance or your code section doesn't speak to whether or not the permits run with the land, then the common law would say it does run with the land. The common law is about black letter law. They could have avoided that by just saying it does run with the land. This new code section avoids any reference to common law by saying it doesn't run with the land. Simple as that.
Thank you, that's all I have.
So I wrote a lot of notes down here. Tonight my comments are going to be rambling. They're going to be all over the place. A lot of these are going to be questions that I don't necessarily need an answer for, but some of them are questions that I'm going to follow up with either sponsors or try and get some answers for because they're important to me. The number one, I guess I'll start by saying, as a whole, I support this ordinance. I understand that the process that happened to get us here. I understand what the co-sponsors and planning commission are looking to do with this ordinance. So as a whole, I can support it. It doesn't leave it without questions though, which I think is extremely healthy for such an overarching ordinance like this that is going to affect so many of our locals and the economy that they've built for Sitka. So my number one concern with this ordinance is data. I've asked for it before to show me something that absolutely indicates that short-term rentals are a cause or are the cause of not having long-term rentals or houses on the market. And the reason that I need that is because I'm happy to make ordinance based off of fact. I'm not happy to make ordinance based off of assumptions. And that one scares me here because I don't want to continue going down a road where we can make assumptions and continue to pass ordinance on that. So this is something that I'm probably going to reach out to co-sponsors and planning commission to see if they have anything that has not been presented tonight. I wonder if the if loss of a conditional use permit for a property could potentially be for the appeal of a property tax valuation. Is that going to come forward to our assessor? On the other side, does that increase, if you already have a short-term rental permit, does that increase the valuation of your property? I wonder how many units are actually going to be opened up by this. It's been brought up that short-term rental is a commercial use of a residential area. I would submit that long-term renting is a commercial use as well. It's been presented that investment companies have bought up properties. I don't doubt that fact, but we don't know if those are long-term rentals or short-term rentals, because that long-term renting is a commercial enterprise as well. Are any other communities doing stuff similar? We heard of one. Thank you for that example. It starts to answer my question. But the reason I want to know if any other communities are doing the same is I'd like to see if they have legal challenges before we get down that road. Because I don't want to go too far and be the test case for legal challenges. Is this ever going to be retroactive? Does the Assembly, are we going to come back and say, well, no, we now are going to retroactively place this on permits? That could substantially change why someone bought a house in the beginning. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not arguing either side of it. Empty houses. Is there going to be a side effect where someone normally had a short-term rental in the off-season, say in the winter, as they occupied their house in the summer, and as opposed to doing a short-term rental, now they just have the house empty? Because I don't think that's a benefit to Sitka. And then the last thing I'll speak to tonight is enforcement, because I think this is the most important part of this. There is no enforcement clause in here. There is no actionable items for enforcement. So if I started short-term renting my house, I don't see anything that indicates how enforcement would happen on my property. I hope that that is a very near and next step of this, because it's going to even be weird to say this, but a black market short-term rental, what do we do to stop that? And I don't know if there's other mechanisms in place already outside of this ordinance, but that is a potential side effect of this, is that people will simply not register them and continue to do as such. There may or may not be cases of that in town already from what I've heard. So that was my ramble for this evening. I hope some of those questions are thought-provoking. It's the notes that I wrote down tonight. And like I said, some of those I'm going to do some more research on. If anybody had answers for them tonight, that'd be great. But if not, thank you for your time. Kevin Knox.
Yeah, and I won't go through and try to provide answers for all of them, but I think the enforcement piece, since it's been brought up a couple of different times, is an important one to address. We don't have enforcement on our current permit other than, or the current permit process, other than every once in a while, Amy or the planning department staff will kind of do a little dig on the various different platforms just to see what's out there and see if they match up with their records. It's not something we have a lot of resource to do very often. There are different companies that actually do this kind of thing out there, and they've been serving a number of different communities around the U.S. With great success, because they actually do some pretty deep dives on it, and including Granicus has come forward to us. We all received the email, and they've reached out at least they reached out to me at one point, and I referred them back to the administrator's office in the planning department, but they do kind of queries on this sort of thing too, like how many short-term rentals are out there, and they do a deep enough dive on it that they even get into those commercial zones, and the residential permit zones too that we have experienced here. So as far as like who does the enforcement, or if we even should have this just because we don't have an enforcement mechanism in here, I think that's something that we need to address in the future, but I don't think it's right now. We need to react to, even just if you look anecdotally, we don't have the hard numbers on how many, long terms have been pulled off and put into the short term, how many are existing out there at this moment, but we do have that one very solid concrete one that just happened this last planning meeting that we can point to. And I know an N of 1 doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's there, it's happening. That was a long-term rental and was pulled up. That is no longer there. So I hope that we do move forward in finding some good hard data, because I do agree, Stephen, that having that is it's an important factor within all of this, and how we react and how we then manage it too. So our housing crisis in Sitka is only growing. We really do need to do something at this point.
Kristen?
Mine's in line with the data request too. So Tor had mentioned that just at the last planning meeting, there were 2 requests that came. Since the moratorium, I think that was in the springtime, I know that we were worried potential number. Some communities were experiencing an increase of up towards of 500%, I think was the number. Have we been tracking that over the summer? Do we have information on how many requests have come, not just at this last meeting, but since the season began?
I can give you an informal one, and Amy can probably give you a more broad one, but just, I can say kind of anecdotally, it's been rare that there's a planning commission meeting where there isn't at least one. I've got the minutes in front of me here. There's been a couple of meetings where there weren't one, but much more likely it's there's been multiple ones. And they've been, there's been a few of them that would have been caught by this. I know, again, Amy could be much more exact, but where haven't seen any from people out of town, but we have seen a number from people in town who have second residences, and then there's been a few that probably would have been okay with the 180 days thing, where basically people moving out of their house for the summer. And I don't have much of a problem with that as long as they don't take another rental off the market, but most people are point fishing, is that what's what it is. But like I say, Amy, probably by next meeting, could give you that number, or since this is first reading.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to kind of address the data in a big picture kind of answer. Yes, we could try to get maybe between this meeting and next, we'll ask Amy to provide us with some hard data as far as this summer. However, I'd like to go back to the planning. Well, first I'll say this. This is a national trend, and we would have to have our blinders on to not see that this is a national trend, and it's a national problem. And I want to go back to that, the town hall that we had a lot of community involvement, and there was one person, I believe she was an attorney, she spoke out, and she was one of the people who was against the moratorium, and she spoke out, and she said, we were having this basic discussion about whether this was going to be a problem. And she said, yeah, currently it may not be that bad. But she said, it would be foolish to think that there are not outside entities looking at Sitka right now with plans for this. So do we want to wait until it's unfixable, and then we'll say, well, we have the data? No, we need to do this now. It's basically a hole in the ship. We have to plug this hole, period, to prevent this from happening. So, I'm all for getting a little data by the next meeting. That's fine, but it is happening, and we need to protect ourselves from this happening in the future. I do agree with the enforcement. We need to deal with that, and I look forward to working on that. But right now, we're not going to not pass it. We shouldn't just not pass it because we don't have any enforcement. Like, as Kevin said, there's not enforcement on the other code. But there are ways to deal with it. That's my only response to all your comments. Thank you.
Rebecca?
Mr. Mayor, could we ask Amy to come up?
Yes, you can.
Okay, yeah, Amy, if you don't mind. I had a meeting with Amy a couple of years ago, and we talked about, you had started to collect some data, and then the pandemic hit. And so when we say that we need data, there were things that you were already starting to look at when we talked probably almost 2 years ago. And then my second question, so just what is the information you're currently collecting? And then my second question is, I think we increased staff in the planning department. Is that going to help in any way with reconciling Airbnb ads with actual ground truths? Yeah, so any input you have?
Sure. Amy Ainsley, Planning Director. The Planning Department has been working to dial in the annual short-term rental report. So for those of you who may not know, anyone who receives a conditional use permit for a short-term rental or a inn or a bed and breakfast is required on an annual basis to report back to the Planning Department on whether or not they're keeping that permit active, making sure that we have up-to-date contact information, and some of the other stuff that we gather is how many nights were rented, how much bed tax was collected, and starting in about 2020 and a little bit more in 2021, we started tracking how many of these units are standalone dwelling units, how many of them are primary residences, how many of those are owners on site while the unit is being rented. And so those have been compiled into the annual reports that we give both to the Planning Commission and to the Assembly. The issue there is that we only can track those that are conditional uses, and it excludes those that are in commercial zones because they don't require any permitting through our department, and so we don't have the information about where those are located, and so it's incredibly difficult for us to be able to establish a baseline of how many other rentals there might be throughout the community because we don't have a mechanism of tracking those very well. In terms of staffing and resources, we did get another position in the Planning Department. Thank you very much to the Assembly. We posted that job today. Very excited to get more resource into the Planning Department to do some of this kind of excellent work. I think that in addition to the upfront application process, I think having some more staff to help develop a little bit more robust application process to get this information on the front end will be really helpful with enforcement, but also being able to work with our code enforcement officer as well will be helpful. I do think that, we should certainly explore some of the private market options that are out there, because they can do far more sophisticated data scraping across the internet than we will ever be able to do. But of course, having more resource to dedicate to those things, to, act upon the reports that we receive, is certainly, makes us a lot more able to respond, and to enforce appropriately.
I had another question. I don't remember who sent me something about Ketchum, Idaho, and they have a wonderful sort of suite of things that they've done in Ketchum to deal with their housing issues. And I think it was there that I read that we can require Airbnb and VRBO and other platforms to provide data to us, to advertise permit numbers, and then to report back on those permits. Is that something we're doing?
Is not. There are lots of other communities that, in terms of regulating short-term rentals, have taken the approach of both regulating the users, the permit holders themselves, and and how those permits is issued, as well as platforms as well. This particular ordinance does not address the platform piece of it, but there are lots of other communities that are addressing that, in conjunction with other short-term rental regulations.
So this could be a step, and then there are more steps we could take.
If so desired, yes.
And then I was wondering, Commissioner Alderson had once given us some numbers. Could we ask her? Is she still here? Is that allowed?
Yes, you're welcome to ask anybody who's in the room to, you can ask.
I can ask, but I think I don't have any more questions for Amy. But
Does anyone else have
is there a number that I might be able to?
Well, I just remember Wendy talking to us one time, and she had information. Remember the Southeast by the numbers and the occupancy, the vacancy rate question, and she had looked into that, and I don't know if it's really pertinent to this conversation, but I don't know. Do you still have those numbers?
Not off the top of my head, but if you would call me forward, I would speak to that. It's up to you.
Sure. Come on up.
And
That's
before we have Amy step away from the table, does anyone else have anything for Amy while she's up here? Thank you for your participation. Please.
Thank you, Wendy Alderson. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. However, I would maybe remind you that in my testimony at the meeting where the moratorium was not moved forward, I did give you 4 years of specific numbers of every single short-term rental permit that have been issued in a residential area, where it was, whether it was turned from short-term to long-term, whether it was a standalone home, whether it was a mother-in-law apartment. So I will go back and I will try to provide you with those numbers again, because I'm not a data expert, but when you say you want numbers, isn't that what you're talking about, local numbers, right? So if I will do my best to provide you again with the 4-year history of every single short-term rental permit, conditional use permit that has been issued, and whether it was long-term to short-term, whether it was standalone,
Is that something where you went through past minutes?
Every single past minute of every single meeting for the last 4 years to look at who applied, whether they were living there, whether it was a long-term. And, it's not specific because you don't have to give that information, but I went through the notes to look at the discussions, and that was very illuminating.
I think that's what I was remembering. So we do have some information. I know Amy's collecting information now and going forward and has a little bit, and then you had also done this sort of, if you call it data mining, where you go back and read the minutes.
So those are the numbers I have, and I will send them all to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
this conversation. I was gonna save it for my report at the end, as it did come up at our AML conference. However, I think it's much more important at this point, and for the people in the room as well to hear that we depart before we get to reports. So we had a presenter come from the University of Alaska, and they did a presentation about housing, and they were looking into the numbers that we all know right now. And what I got out of it, which wasn't resounding, it wasn't, it didn't make me feel better at the end of it, but we could summarize their report by saying we all know what the numbers are, but we don't know why. Then no one that asked a question, and short-term rentals came up. They said, well, is it because of this? Is it because of this? Is it because of this? And it was not one solid issue that could be presented as why not only Alaska, but the nation has a housing crunch right now. Lots of factors did play into it. I even spoke with the gentleman on the side and asked in Sitka, since we do have a large population of retired individuals that aren't in the workforce, because this is also a workforce presentation, kind of hand in hand, is it retired individuals buying homes, and that's why our workforce is down. And I said, well, it would be an easy assumption, but they don't have the data to prove that either. So this is what makes this conversation hard, is that everybody knows that there's an issue here, and we know our boat is filling up with water. I don't know where the hole is. We gotta try and find that hole. And it sounds like that there's multiple holes in this boat as it's going down. So that's why I say I can support this ordinance overall. I just have questions and concerns going forward that I feel we need to hash out. The enforcement one really scares me. I don't know what we can do. I don't know. I don't know if we can just flip the lights off on a rental if they're found to be operating illegally. I don't know if we want to do that. So I think putting code out in front of it definitely helps the process, but without enforcement, it prevents next to nothing, unfortunately. Anything else from the assembly this evening? Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to approve ordinance 2022-21 on first reading, Ms. Hemshoot?
Yes.
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis?
Yes.
Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
And Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0 on first reading for item F.
That brings us to item D, please.
I move to approve ordinance 2022-22 on first reading, making supplemental appropriation for fiscal years 2022 and 2023, reappropriations and supplemental appropriations. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 22-22. John, I understand Melissa Haley has a brief introduction on this one.
Melissa Haley, Finance Director. So to summarize this ordinance, this is one that you see pretty much every year. This is the rollover of certain items that were budgeted in FY22 that we were not able, essentially not able to get to a point where there was a commitment in place. So there was no purchase order, there was no contract signed, yet it's work that still needed to happen. So in this case, we have our cost allocation study and our traffic study, both of which were part of the tourism appropriation. So those were the supplemental appropriations that we made early this spring. So those we just didn't quite get far enough along for it to already be committed. And then we have our vehicles, which we are just having a terrible time finding any vehicles to buy. So these are from FY22 appropriations. You know, we've looked and looked
for vehicles, and we couldn't even find one that we could make a firm enough commitment that we could sign papers on. So these are vehicles we still need to replace, and so we're just asking that that appropriation roll over into FY23. In addition to those rollovers, we are asking for, and just to note, the traffic study also, when we made the appropriation in the spring, we did it as an operating appropriation. It's really more capital in nature, so we're also requesting that that change be made as we're rolling it over. We also have just related, but slightly different, there is attached to this memo a list of existing commitments that we've made. These amounts automatically roll over, but we wanted to provide that to you so you can see that change, because it does result in a change to our FY23 budget and our FY22. So the FY22 budget reduces for the amount that automatically rolls over into FY23. We also have 2 funds that went over budget for FY22, or that we anticipate will. We're still doing some final year-end entries. So we have the Sitka Community Hospital Dedicated Fund, and that there was a payment on one of the hospital liabilities that we thought was finished up in FY21 or 22. There was an extra payment that hadn't been budgeted for. So that is completely finalized now, but it did cause the fund to go over budget. And then the harbor fund is over budget as well. That is largely a result of the needing to destroy derelict vessels. And the harbor fund has been very diligent about writing off bad debt, which is an accounting entry, but it does result in an increased expense. So that pushed the fund over budget. I think it's important to note that at this point, that fund is $802,000 ahead on the revenue side.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Is there any public comment on ordinance 22-22?
Good evening, Assembly. This is on item D of the agenda, which has to do with supplemental appropriations. We all understand about rollovers and how that works economically. But there's one thing that I wish to have people note, and that is the Sitka Community Hospital overage is for $254,000. I know that's nothing, but it is $254,000. But it's not the gross amount that is concerning, it is what it is for. It has to do with a payment on the Cerner Health electronic records. And there are some people sitting at this table who remember that discussion. And it was allowed to pass through, though it was something that should not have been. This was a failure of understanding what this deal was, and it was a failure of Sitka Community Hospital's administration for putting this forward in a way which kind of forced the vote. I voted against it at that time. It was a 7-figure issue that the Assembly voted to have, which we, very soon thereafter sold the hospital, and we were contractually bound to pay this. So this is $254,000, which is something that, all of these things add up, and sometimes they come back to bite you. And this one bit us big. That could have been money going to any number of things. But we have very short memories. And so that is why we need to keep bringing these things back as discussion, because they just get buried. And so $254,000, I know it ain't a lot, but the total cost was in the 7 figures. And so it would be interesting if one of the news medias would, KCAW or Sitka Sentinel, would go back into the time machine and do a report on what this was all about. But I will not hold my breath. Thank you very much for your kind attention and patience.
Is there any other public comment on 22-22? Assembly deliberation?
I think Melissa addressed it really well, and this is something that we see typically every single year. It's a very standard thing. Thank you for your explanation.
Crystal?
I have questions for Melissa. So when it came to the study, it had mentioned that we thought that was going to be an operating expense and it moved to capital. Can you just explain the reason that that got shifted?
Sure, oftentimes, there's certain kinds of information, I think a master plan is a good example, that it really becomes an asset. It's something that we use to help derive value for, if it's a fund or a governmental, or our entity. And this would be one of those cases.
Okay. And then the $157,000 for the harbor, that was split between two things, bad debt and then the, I don't even know what you call them.
Derelict vessels.
The derelict vessels. Do you know the breakdown between that?
The derelict vessels were around 80,000, and then the rest was bad debt.
And is that typical year to year? Or do we expect that to go down in this next year?
I know there was a big push to deal with derelict vessels last year. In terms of bad debt, the harbor department has been very diligent, and they've kind of gone through a full year of really following up on sending collection letters and that kind of thing. The hope is that soon we'll actually start to see recovery of bad debt revenue increase there.
Okay. And then with respect to that fund, I just want to make sure I wrote it down. You said 802,000 ahead on revenue in the harbor fund. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is based on early estimates for our raw fish tax, which raw fish tax that we attribute to FY22 comes in. It hasn't come in yet, and it is a fairly conservative estimate there, so it may actually end up being higher.
Okay. And then the last question has to do with the community hospital EHR. That is something that we will not see next year when this comes forward, right?
No, that is completely resolved.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Melissa while she's up here? Melissa, I do have one. We talked about the strength of the harbor fund. We didn't talk about the strength of the Sitka Community Hospital dedicated fund. With that additional $250,000 out, how does that fund look?
We're just putting our final entries in today, so I don't have the final number, but it has throughout the year tracked a little bit ahead on revenue.
Okay, so we can afford that payment. I know we don't necessarily have a choice, but we can afford that payment at this point without a massive detrimental effect to the fund.
More or less, that fund, it's challenging right now because we still have all of the PERS payments going out. So it will take a while, now that we're easing off, finishing up all of the final hospital liabilities for the tobacco tax to come in, and then the revenue coming in from search is still restricted, as there's still that final Stark liability that has yet to be resolved, and we can't really access that revenue and fully recognize that as revenue from search until that final liability is done.
Do we run the risk of this account going negative due to this payment?
Not because of this payment, no. It's not in, if you look at the balance sheet, it's not the healthiest looking fund right now. But
Okay, yeah, and I just smiled because it sounds like that needs to be a future conversation that we have, just so that I better understand the outflows of that account. Thank you. Any other questions for Melissa? Okay, thank you, Melissa. Assembly deliberation. Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to approve ordinance 2022-22 on first reading, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis?
Yes.
Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Timshut?
Yes.
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
And Mr. Mosier?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0 on item D, first reading.
Thank you. It is the top of the hour, so we will take a 5-minute break and then jump back into item E.
Updating Title 19 Building and Construction of the Sitka General Code by adding a new chapter and modifying and amending the majority of all other chapters within this title.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. John, I understand Pat has an introduction for this one.
Pat has been waiting with Christmas-like anticipation.
And it says majority of all other chapters. Sir, brief introduction, please. If we have questions, we can invite you back up as well.
Good evening, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, Pat Sweeney, building official. The primary purpose of this ordinance is to update Sitka's adopted building life safety codes to the most current editions of those codes. There's a couple of primary reasons for that move. They are the Sitka's building code effectiveness grading schedule through the insurance services office, and maintaining our deferral from the Alaska State Fire Marshal's office. A little bit on those, the building code effectiveness grading schedule is a rating that's established by the insurance services office, which is a private company that provides the ratings of around 20,000 municipalities across the country to insurance companies for the means for their when they set up their property insurance rates. So they use that rating scale. They can use that rating scale to decide what the rates should be. Late last year, the insurance services office contacted me to initiate the next round of grading. The last time we were assessed for this was in 2013. And I guess our term was up. They measure a lot of different data points. There's about 1,000, better than 1,000 different data points. The one kicker is that if we don't have building codes that are adopted within the last, that were published within the last 5 years, then essentially our rating defaults to its lowest rating. And since our adopted building codes were published in 2012, by default, we basically are going to fail this rating if we don't update our codes. So that covers that briefly. I can get questions as needed. The second factor being the Sitka's deferral from the Alaska State Fire Marshal's office. We hold a deferral along with approximately 9 other communities in the state, and that allows Sitka it benefits the Sitka's commercial developers and property owners by allowing the city of Sitka to provide locally plan reviews and fire life safety inspections of commercial developments and buildings under the authority of the Alaska Fire Marshal's office, and these reviews and inspections are required by state. And so since we can do them in-house, essentially, we're able to provide that expertise locally and that qualifications with a much more personal, in-person and reasonable service rather than dealing directly with the state, which can be very frustrating. Similarly, to maintain our deferral, among other things, we have to adopt codes that are in line with at least as restrictive and not less restrictive and not older than the codes that are adopted by the state. They are currently passing legislation to adopt these updated codes, the 2021 high codes, and they expect that to pass before the end of the calendar year. While going through this adoption, reading through chapters 19 of the code there was a lot of inconsistencies in verbiage and the way the sections were put together, and so I went through and I didn't do it alone, I had a lot of help from the legal department and the clerks. We went through and we basically, to an intent to establish clear, consistent verbiage with the intent to improve the readability and the coherency, we went through and we really did some extensive wording changes, additions, deletions, that the majority of them don't actually change the substance of the code. It's intended to make it clearer and easier to read for people who want to do their own research, or for us to be able to explain to people by showing them the code. Due to that, due to a significant amount of revisions proposed, we have drafted the narrative that I've also attached to assembly, or that memo, that basically outlines anything in there that either were substantive changes or could have been construed as substantive changes, just to help with clarity, because I know looking through that adoption, there's a lot of strikeouts, there's a lot of underlines, but most of them really don't amount to a lot of change or any change. So that's it in a nutshell. Thanks for listening to the summary. I'm here for any questions you got. If you got any now, or I can retire.
Thank you, and we do a public comment before
Copy that.
questions. Call you back up if we have any. Is there any public comment on ordinance 22-20? Assembly deliberation? Yes, it looks to me as if IBC simply updated, and we just needed to update that. That's what this appears. Thank you, Pat, for all of your work on this. It definitely looks like you just did it in an afternoon in your office. Just one or two line scratches on 20, 30 pages worth. And I don't need this answer now, but just something to think about. Once we put this into place, would this potentially have a negative effect of someone who is in the middle of construction now under current code, and then perhaps their occupancy permit would be denied because then we adopt a new code? Actually, yes, I would like an answer on that one now, if you could. Thank you.
Pat Speed again, building official. I appreciate that question. That's a good point. We provide our inspections according to the codes that were in effect when the permit was issued. So if the permit was issued 3 years ago, we're utilizing our inspections are based on those codes. So no, it would not affect a project under construction currently. It might affect applications that have been turned in that haven't been issued yet, but once again, that permit issue date is really what we dictate our inspections by. And I guess it's another good point that, as far as I can tell, these updated, I mean, even though we're looking at a 9-year change, 3 code cycles, there shouldn't be a substantial change in the cost of construction due to this. There's not a whole lot of changes that would make a big difference in that. So I guess that's probably a good point to make.
Perfect, thank you. I appreciate that. I think my example is pretty drastic, but if, say, a foundation code had changed and they built it to old code and new code says that was no longer good, I'd hate to see someone have to tear down a house. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. Is there anything else for Pat while he's here? Crystal?
I think I might have heard that. Oh,
No, I'm sorry, I didn't see Angela.
okay. The memo referenced 2012 updates, and then we're referencing 2021 updates. Is that what prompted us to make these changes? Or I think you had mentioned 3 code changes in that time period. What prompts us to say we need to update our code?
So currently, we're on the 2012 I-codes, and the I-codes are published every 3 years. And so when I say 3 code cycles, the 2015 went out, it was not adopted. The 2018 went out, it was not adopted. The 2021 is the current code, and the basis for our reasoning for why we should be adopting them is mainly those 2 main factors that I pointed out: our building code effectiveness grading schedule, which can affect property tax rates across town for private and commercial properties, and also to maintain our fire marshal's deferral. Because if we don't update newer codes, we will fail our effectiveness grading schedule, and we would, once the state adopts the 2021 codes, which they're more than halfway through, they've been working on it since April, we would lose our deferral if we didn't, in pretty short order afterwards, when they'll give us a grace period, also adopt the same codes or newer.
Okay. So in 24, when they adopt, we can make those changes because we'll be on the 21 cycle. It's going to be fewer. I know we did a lot of cleaning up on this one, so it'll be pretty standard to just bring it forward in that next assembly round to say these are the changes since 21.
Yes, if the state adopts the 2024 codes, they are currently also on the 2012. That's why we still are. So they also skipped the last 2 code cycles as well. So if they do change it, the next one's not gonna have nearly as many underlines and strike-throughs. The chapter was very difficult to follow, there was no consistent formatting whatsoever, and I really believe this is gonna make a big difference in readability and coherency.
Yeah, there's a lot, so I appreciate the work that you put into there, a lot of strike-throughs and additions, so thank you.
I just wanted to, I know it looked like we were about to pass without saying much, and the reason was, this is easy to understand. I appreciate the work that went into this. I mean, it's very straightforward. I'm just interested to know about the permit. I got a permit 25 years ago that I never built it, and maybe I should go back to that project. Anyway, no, thank you. It's easy to understand, and I know we have to do it, so thank you for your time, for the clarity of your memo.
Thank you, Brian, for Pat, or?
I actually just have a comment about Pat, and Pat gave credit to legal for helping us out, and the truth is that my assistant Carl Brennan did all the heavy lifting on this grinding work, lots of meetings that Pat and Coral had to do to make all those strikes and additions, and then when it was all done, I looked at a handful of substantive things that they looked at it, spent an hour or 2 on it, and that's it, but the credit goes to Pat and Coral for digging down deep. And I think you should all know what their purpose needs to be restated of doing all that digging. It was to make sure that both the industry and the public would understand the code better. And I think they did a fabulous job in that respect.
Great, thank you. And next time, make sure your meetings are not grinding, as Brian said. No, I just think that is another kudos to you. We don't often see you sit in front of us, so to take this gold star and wear it proudly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anything else from the assembly? Sarah?
Okay, on a motion to approve ordinance 2022-20 on first reading, Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
Ms. Kimshoot?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Knox? Oh, sorry,
Mr. Knox,
Mr. Knox,
sign
please.
off.
Sorry about that. And Mayor Eisenbach?
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0 on first reading.
Brings us to additional new business items. We have a resolution in front of us.
I move to approve resolution 2022-23 on first and final reading supporting Sitka Maritime Heritage Society's application under the FY22 Historic Preservation Fund Grant Program for certified local governments.
It's been moved and seconded to approve resolution 22-23. Amy had an introduction on this one?
Yeah, while Amy walks up, I do want to commend her on the process this year. I think you probably remember in previous years where this is one where we've come forward last minute and rush, or we try to backdate it and get this grant through. This is a recurring grant program. But this year, even though the application deadline is in a couple of days, the notice of funding and that timeline that we have to work in is very short. So Amy put together a great plan on kind of kicking off this process and hitting milestones to get here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Amy, I'm gonna run out of gold stars.
None needed.
Thank you.
Amy Ainsley, Planning Director. So the certified local government grants that are available to us are through the State Historic Preservation Office, and they are federal funds that first go to the state. The city then applies for them and then passes them through to an applicant, which generally is a nonprofit organization. In this case, it's the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society applying for an additional certified local government grant for the work that they are doing on the Tchaikovsky Island Boathouse. They have received several of these grants in the past and are using this particular grant to continue work on some of the exterior walls of the building, as well as building an accessible bathroom that will be added onto the building. The Historic Preservation Commission did review this application at their August 10th meeting, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval of it. This case is is a little bit interesting since we are also the property owners in this case. We lease the property that the Joukowsky Island Boathouse is located onto the Maritime Society. And in the past, we have often been asked by the granting agency for a covenant on the property, which is generally to ensure that if they give funds to preserve a building, that building doesn't then get torn down or modified in a way that doesn't honor the historic nature of the building. Those covenants usually run 5 to 10 years, and we'll probably be asked to add another one onto the building and onto the property as a result of receiving this grant. I don't know yet from the granting agency what that term will be, but again, usually 5 to 10 years, and that term of 5 to 10 years does fall within the renewal options that we have on this lease. So we're kind of within that window of the lease life expectancy. Happy to answer any questions upon coming back from public comment on this, but these are annual grants that we've been kind of applying for on a pretty regular basis. And the Maritime Heritage Society has applied for several of these in the past and kind of knows the drill for the most part, and so this has kind of become kind of a standard annual program that we do.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on resolution 22-23?
This will be very quick.
Good evening, Assembly. My only question is this a single audit?
And sir, if you could state your name for the record, please.
I am gratified.
I will state my name for the record. It is Richard Weed. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, my name is Bruce Gasaway.
There's a button on the bottom of the microphone. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, my name is Bruce Gasaway, and I'm a board member for the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society. And we just wanted to, first of all, thank you for considering this matter. And secondly, we certainly would appreciate your support and with the supporting resolution. We do regret the short time frame on this. Ordinarily, I believe we get 90 to 180, 120 days for these grant programs. This one, there was a 60-day window, and not a preferred situation. As most of you probably know, the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society has been working on the Joukowsky Boathouse for close to 15 years now. We have applied for 10 of these grants in the past, and we've been consistently successful in meeting the grant requirements and satisfying the granting agency. We really would appreciate your support. We feel that we're working slowly to restoring a vital part of our of what was the Sitka Maritime Heritage and our maritime economy. Our goal in the long term is to create a museum of skills and to reopen this as a boathouse for fishermen and boat owners. We're a long way from that, but this grant would help us towards that goal. I'm available for questions. I'll take my seat if you'd rather, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, during public comment, there is no back and forth. If we do have questions, we'll call you back up.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other public comment on resolution 22-23? Assembly deliberation? Crystal?
I feel awful because Bruce just walked to the back of the room. I have 2 quick questions for you. You know, you see would say stop, don't make him, but it's just with respect to the previous, I counted 9, but you guys just mentioned 10. What does the end look like? It sounds like this is an annual thing. How
My
many?
hearing is not good, man.
Sure. I'm wondering, we have 9 or 10 previous grant awards. How many more do we anticipate for this project?
Well, ma'am, if you couple the lights that come to the building, it needs a lot of work. And I would expect at least as many more. Yeah, and the building was not in good shape when the city acquired it. We were, the Historical Society took the lead in helping the city identify this property and encouraging the city to acquire it because of its historic value and the fact that it was at one time a very important facility for supporting the local maritime industry.
And then one more question. So the covenant in the grants, they referenced that they wanted it to be available for public use. It sounds like we have, it's not open to the public at present. We're working towards that, or how is it publicly utilized?
We worked a lot with Pat on this. Again, one more to give him kudos. We do not have the right of permanent occupancy at this time, but under the provisions of our of the lease agreement that we have, and with the permits that we've applied for, we can have temporary events, and we do temporary events every year. We've had boat building classes, we've had kayak building classes, we had a tour and an open house just last weekend. So we do make an effort to make it available to the public. Unfortunately, in its current condition, it's not an ideal setting. It'll take some more work before we're really able to open it up for permanent use. The finishing of a bathroom would be a major factor in that. And I think that itself will do a lot to make it more usable.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Bruce while he's up here? Thank you, sir. And Rebecca, you had something?
Yeah, I just want to point out the prolific work of the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society. They just keep plugging away at this project, and they're making progress, but it's all volunteers. They do it on weekends, they do it on evenings, or whenever they do it. It's not a paid job for anyone, so I appreciate their continued diligence and effort to preserve this part of Sitka's history.
Anything else from the assembly? Sarah? Kevin?
Yeah, I guess Melissa to come up real quick. Sorry. I'm just gonna ask her a question about the staff time, but I did what everyone said. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I think it's a great thing. I just noticed in the fiscal note that it said, in this case, at the very last line, the federal Davis-Bacon rules mean that most contracts will meet the threshold of an additional CBS staff support is anticipated. I'm assuming because it's in here and you guys are pushing, it's not an unreasonable amount of staff time.
It's not. Currently, what we do with all of these, when a new grant is issued, we do a training session. One of the challenges is this is federal money. It's also city money because it passes through us. So as it passes through us, all of the federal strings stay in place. So that's where I mentioned Davis-Bacon. And, that's a heavier lift. It's federal Davis-Bacon, so the threshold is $2,000. So any contract over $2,000, they're going to have to collect certified payroll. We have to review that before we make any payments to them. These are all reimbursable grants, so we have to review all of the paperwork, make sure everything is in order, because we are audited on their work with pass-through grants, and we have to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what the federal rules are and what the city procurement rules are. So those all pass through, so it's kind of challenging money.
You feel comfortable with this?
We've been doing it for years, and I'll tell you that our grant agreements with these went from being a couple pages to now it's a stack of paper. I think the federal rules have gotten stricter, so we have to get stricter on it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from the assembly? Sarah?
On the motion to approve resolution 2022-23 on first and final reading, Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Mosier?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot?
Yes.
Mr. Christensen?
Yes.
And Mayor Eisenbeis.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 on item G.
Item H, please.
I move to approve resolution 2022-22 on first and final reading, authorizing the municipal administrator to apply for a Safe Streets for All grant with the Department of Transportation for $550,000 with a $150,000 match commitment to support development of a comprehensive safety action plan.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve resolution 22-22. John, Melissa Henshaw has a introduction on this.
Yep, well, Melissa's making her way up here. A few things I'd like to say is that when I learned about the Safe Streets for All grant and the opportunities available, especially with partnering other agencies like the Sitka Tribe, I was very, very, very excited about this, and Melissa and Michael can probably attest to that, because that's like, get on this now, with the intent to kind of tackle Catlin and some of the issues we have there with pedestrian areas and how narrow that street is and how tight it can be, and just, you've all seen it, people walking down the road, there's just repairs that need to be made there and trying to make that safer for everyone. So my excitement was squashed a bit when we went to some of the meetings with multiple agencies helping us do this infrastructure bill. And they said, well, is this area defined in your comprehensive safety action plan? And I said, what's a comprehensive safety action plan? And we're not unique in that. Most Alaskan communities did not have one. So fortunately, this program is kind of a two-stage grant where first step is they're going to, if we are awarded this grant, this will support us in putting together that comprehensive safety action plan for our entire road system within Sitka. And now we've got a plan to build from for future years, not just with this grant, but with any other opportunities that pop up. So hopefully I didn't steal everything, Melissa, but you can go ahead, please.
John did a good job. Melissa Henshaw, Public and Government Relations Director. So like John had said, after we got to digging a little bit deeper into the NOFA, which is Notice of Funding Opportunity, we realized that we needed this comprehensive safety action plan. So that's what this grant is for. And then hopefully we will be able to go after real infrastructure funding with regards to roads. And specifically, we're looking at Catlin. So this is part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and so it's a 5-year bill that money will be coming. There will be $1 billion coming every year for 5 years, and so we're trying to get in early so that we can then get this action plan completed and then go after some other funding as well.
Great, thank you. If we have questions, we'll line back up. Is there any public comment on resolution 22-22?
Good evening, Assembly. This is Richard Mead. Normally, when I look through these authorize administrator to apply for safe streets and these grants, and I think it's wonderful that there is money available and the city is searching for it. But in going over the detail of it, I found it a little difficult to understand what this was for. The administrator, Mr. Leach, explained that this is for the action plan. But what is interesting when you read the goals of the action plan, for example, it says the goal of 0 roadway fatalities and serious injuries. And they give some numbers from 2016 to 2020. And in Sitka, serious injuries were only 6, and in 2020 there were 0. And within the packet, it did not really describe whether this was just for infrastructure or other items that we could utilize to reduce traffic mishaps. And one of the things that I was thinking of is when you have an action plan, is it just down at Capitan and doing some road work, which we're going to do anyway at some point. But does it mean that we will now be plowing, salting, and sanding our roads in a timely fashion? Because that is where a lot of this stuff happens. And so does it allow for us to purchase these type of items to help keep our streets clean during our black ice days? And so those are some of the questions I have. Also, this is a $550,000 grant, $50,000 contingency, and $100,000 match. So the city's going to have to cough up 100, which I guess is okay. But if you keep adding all these cough ups, people may think you're coughing so much you may have COVID. But the important thing is that what would definitely help is no drinking, no smoking weed. And the other question is, how many FTEs will this require, or will it be done with in-house staff? So those are questions. Especially important are sand, salt, and removal of snow in timely fashion.
Scott Saline, I want to thank you guys for being here. I've been a resident of Capitan for about 40 years. I'm really curious about this, $500,000 to take Capitan from an adherent risk to an element of shared risk by the bottleneck that's there now. A couple road rages every day. I watch behavior that is unsafe, period. Thank you very much.
Any other public comment on resolution 22-22? Assembly discussion? Or?
I just want to thank John for his coherent explanation. Unfortunately, it kind of, I can see it's a little irritating to have to kind of plan before we can apply for the money to actually build. But if we can do that with the money from this grant program, more the better, and hopefully it will show us some things that we didn't really think about. But it makes a lot of sense the way John explained it, so I appreciate that.
Crystal?
Yeah, you mentioned 5 years worth of grants, so I'm guessing annual grant cycle. So if we apply, I think the deadline for this one is coming up in September. When do we think we might hear back?
I don't know the answer to that without pulling the website up in front of me, but I do expect I guess Melissa already knows. But I do expect the next round of this to be at the same time next year. Do you have that answer?
Yeah, so we will find out if we receive funding for this action plan at the beginning of 2023. So then we would go through a 12 to 24 month timeline for the action plan, and then after that, we would be able to apply for
So
other.
would that be in the final grant cycle? Would that be, what year would we be applying for the second? Because even if we heard back immediately, we're moving into that next year where we're not eligible because we're still conducting either 1 year or 2 years out, and then we are hoping from that action plan to apply, but I think it might be towards the end of that 5-year plan.
It'll be in that 4th or 5th year.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that I understood that. Thank you.
Anything else from Melissa Henshaw while she looked? Thank you, Melissa. Kevin?
Chris brings up a good point. I don't know if it's completely germane to this conversation, but I would imagine there's a lot of communities in this position that don't have a safety plan prepared, and so the feds are sending out all this money, but you can't even supposedly get it until you have a safety plan. So I hope that the federal government realizes this. I'm not going to count on their common sense to realize that, but I appreciate that you're on it, and I really hope that we can. Thank you very much, John and Melissa.
John?
Yeah, Mr. Rogers brings up a great point, and Ms. Duncan as well with the timeline here. And I hope this is germane to the conversation. You are correct when you say there's a lot of communities in Alaska that don't have this level of planning done. And the Assembly may remember an email, I think I forwarded to you about a month or so ago, when I asked our delegation through their rep in Juneau if there existed a heat map of sorts so we could see where infrastructure dollars are actually going, because there's no doubt that the Anchorages of the world, or, you know, a lot of places in the lower 48 have these plans together, and then they have the capacity to go after grants like this. So does that make them more competitive? That's a very big concern of mine, because if the infrastructure bill, one of the things they talk about is equity, but if there's a lot of communities that don't have that level of knowledge already, or that level of skill, or that level of planning, it should not be excluded. So I am watching that, and I think it's a great point to bring up.
Anything else from the assembly? Sarah?
On the motion to approve resolution 2022-22 on first and final reading, Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
and Ms. Hamshirt.
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0 on first and final reading on item H.
And item I is a discussion, direction, decision on secure rural schools election percentages. As the memo indicates, I got an email just a couple weeks ago indicating that we were going to have to now direct and allocate our funding, so that this is in front of the body to talk about and potentially go forward on. John, Melissa, Haley had a bit more information about it for us.
Thanks, Mayor. She'll make her way up, and yeah, you captured it already. That email came to you, and we're just pursuing the items that were outlined in the letter.
Melissa Haley, Finance Director. So the letter, the reason we're bringing it to you now, this was another quick turnaround item. The letter came in August 8th, and we need to give a response by August 30th. So that's why this is before you today. So essentially what we need to do is, you often hear about secure rural schools with our budget, often during the discussion of school funding. We usually get a chunk of funding that is approved by Congress every year that we split in some manner between use for our roads and our schools. Well, there's other types of secure rural schools funding. The type that we discuss in that context is type 1, or Title I funding. We also have Title II funding, which is funding that goes directly to the U.S. Forest Service and is used. There's a process where there's a local resource advisory committee that dedicates that funding to projects. Currently, our allocation is 85%, which is the maximum allowed for Title I, and the remaining 15% goes to the U.S. Forest Service. That is what we're recommending that we elect as our allocation going forward. Title III funding does come directly to the city, but it's very restricted in use. The potential uses are for, let's see, a big one is fire protection, which is not such a big, wildland fire protection, which is not such a big issue here in Sitka. Historically, it's been used for search and rescue on federal lands. It can also, has recently been expanded to allow certain broadband and remote learning possibilities. The funding does require a 45-day waiting period, so it has to be advertised publicly, and there's a 45-day waiting period. There also has to be a local resource advisory committee for any proposed projects under that. So additional context is that we already have, from many years ago, Title III funds that we really don't use much. There were years where it was used a little bit for search and rescue because that was the most applicable use for us. However, it's very little. That does not cost us a lot. And for that reason, we're proposing that the funds be split 85% to Title I and 15% to Title II, with a local resource committee, which is actually, it's not local anymore, it's regional. But I can confirm with the state that they seek balanced representation of 3 to 4 members from each area. For ours, it's Sitka, Yakutat, Lynn Canal, Lynn Canal, 2 icy straits, and Juneau. So, and I will be available after public comment for any questions. Or do we?
There is no
There is
motion on the
none,
floor
okay.
right now, so if you don't mind staying,
No.
does the assembly have any questions for Melissa? Rebecca?
Yeah, so maybe this is a changing process because I served on the local RAC years ago, and it was hard to make quorums. We had to have 15 to 18 people from Sitka. And so did they change the rules and that's why?
That's exactly why, is they were having a hard time finding enough committee members locally, and so that's why they went regional.
So something that caught my eye was the broadband for schools part of the Title III. Is the barrier to using Title III the fact that that RAC would have to be convened? But if other communities, I don't know which of those communities receive secure rural schools funds.
This, so my understanding that if we did get Title III, and we have over 500,000 in Title III from pre-2013, we would have to make a proposal to the RAC, which we would have to create locally. And once that proposal was okay, then I believe it would have to be publicized. There would have to be a 45-day waiting period before anything could be done.
And this is for less than $100,000, basically.
It's not going to be a significant amount, no.
Okay. And so the same, all of those Title III uses, we have to come up with the RAC.
Yes, and even I did a little research on, the reason that we're having to make this election. And one of the reasons is that, a lot of municipalities have not been doing it correctly. And honestly, in the past, I don't think we did it correctly when we charged some of the search and rescue funds.
So the Title II also requires a RAC.
It does, but it's the Forest Service has all that work to convene that and manage all of that money and do all of the work relating to that.
Got it, okay, yeah, well that clarifies my choice, thanks.
Anything else from Melissa while she's in front of us?
Are we ready for a motion or?
Anything else from the assembly?
I do have one last question.
I move to direct the municipal administrator to elect the allocation of 85% Title I funding and 15% Title II funding for all secure rural schools payments until such time that a new allocation election is required.
It's been moved and seconded to allocate 85% of Title I funding to, it has been moved and seconded to allocate secure rural schools in the amounts of 85% Title I funding and 15% Title II funding. Is there any public comment on the motion? Assembly deliberation. Rebecca?
I was just going to point out, one of the things that the RAC, when I was on it, did with the money was to continue fertilizing Redoubt Lake. And so they had, I hope it's not negative to say this, but they had a typically long federal process to actually do something with the money, but then they ended up doing things at Nelson Log Roads and thinning and fertilizing Redoubt Lake. So it was money well spent for local people eventually. So I think this is a good motion.
Anything else on the motion on the floor? Sarah?
Mayor Eisenberg,
Yes?
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Ms. Hemshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
and Mr. Moser.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 on item I.
That'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Scott Celine. I'm a refrigeration guy speaking to you right now. It's about those heat pumps. I keep hearing about it. Well, actually, the reason that they made durable goods drop from 7 years to 3 years is because of air-to-air heat pumps. Those exact units have also been installed in the desert. So for example, say a refrigeration troubleshooter went to those installs and could look at the condensate pans and say that the surface tension of condensate melting would mix with a high salt atmosphere like we have ambient here. And the only thing you could do is raise the coil and the compressors up and create a little bit of space so the drainage could get out of there. So if you're gonna do that, then you'd have to call in the electricians to redo all the conduit. And then that fabrication to raise those units, there'd be questions with the borough, the way the city rolls as engineers looking at it, and it would just be too much of a hassle, and then you're just gonna run into the ground, which is what it was, is what you have. Like for example, C-Mark's coil on the roof, that metal for the heat transfer is almost 5 times thicker than an air-to-air heat pump. And when you say industry standards, that's not a consumer aspect. That's for everybody in the industry to agree to use the bare minimum raw materials to present something to the consumers that'll pass for Underwriters Laboratory. That's it. Just thanks again for trying to save town.
Anyone else under persons to be heard?
Good evening, Assembly. This is Richard Weem. There's a lot that Scott Celine has to say, and it is very interesting when he gives his analysis. In this short time, he can't give it completely, but I heard a longer version. So when you have common sense meeting expertise, I think it's a very powerful combination. Some points about prior conversation. I'm sure everybody knows about BlackRock and Vanguard, who are the basic players within this country for all financial transactions. There are a couple of others. These are trillion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar companies, and it is also well known how they are buying up houses. But the thing is, they are not buying them up to use short-term rentals. That's just not happening. This is what happened tonight is not going to prevent BlackRock. They buy it and they do long-term rentals, or even funnier, they just keep the place vacant. But they do unleash their property managers and so forth. So this is not going to stop the BlackRocks, et cetera, from coming in. What we also see in Sitka is that there's a lot of very big money coming into Sitka, and I can see it through purchases of large assets here. So it's already here. But the irony, and gosh, do I love irony, is that short-term rentals are not going to be done by the big guys. Short-term rentals are done by Sitkans. And to hobble local people from earning money, I think, is ironic. The big people ain't interested in it. If you got enough money, you buy the house, so you don't get extra money. You have enough money to avoid it. There was a very big home sale here, and they're just going to live here for 2 months and then leave. And I won't mention the name of the property, but that's what's going to happen. And so the short-term rental, at the end of the day, may end up hurting the people you wish to help the most. Certainly not going to affect BlackRock. Vanguard will laugh in your face. Has anybody ever been here? Everybody here ever been to Steamboat Springs? It's a whole different demographic. Their motion, it's a very high-end town. It's like Aspen. It's like these other places, and maybe they want to keep the riffraff out through these things. I don't know what their deliberations are, but it's a whole different demographic. In Sitka, we have to deal with different things. And that's why we need to design places better for the Sitka Land Trust and have multiple units adjoined and do a force multiplier in living.
Anyone else under persons to be heard this evening? Seeing none, that'll bring us on to reports. Sitka was lucky enough to host the mid-session summit of AML. It feels like forever ago, but it was 2 weeks ago, gentlemen. Lots happened since then. The good news about it is that all the attendees were very happy with Sitka. Fortunately, the weather broke for them and they were able to get some of the sunshine in Sitka. But the second day we came into a room of nothing but people extremely happy with Sitka as a community. So we definitely have that going for us. A couple sessions that I sat in, some key points to bring back. Daycare. Daycare is a huge issue, just like housing. And it's actually one of the reasons stated that we may not be seeing our workforce come back. So there are a couple groups working on daycare, not necessarily daycare as somewhere to drop off your kid, but daycare as workforce development and redevelopment, getting the people who are potentially staying home to take care of children back into the workforce. Juneau, and I have not had a chance yet to look at it, but Juneau has gone down a path of starting to help their child care system. Apparently it is something worth looking at for those who are interested, but all in all, at the end of the day, it would appear that in order for daycare to be viable long-term, that the current model that exists does not work for daycare. Wages are too low for staff members, while not being able to charge much more for each child who attends. So ultimately it came down to that in one form or another, there's going to need to be a subsidy in place for child care to continue. This group is looking at multiple options on how daycare centers can pool their resources together to try and keep costs down, but it's going to continue to be an issue. I spoke to housing earlier, and once again I'll say that the resounding thing that came out is that we all know the numbers, we all know the issues, but none of us know why the issues are there. And that came from multiple different people speaking. And they can tell you the numbers, but they can't say why. And I think that's kind of the struggle of the nation right now. Sitka's not alone in our housing struggle. We, as many communities, are struggling with housing. I had a conversation with the lieutenant of the Trooper Academy here, just a couple interesting points. They start their people at $34 an hour for a trooper right now. And I had a conversation with him about modernizing the policing methods, because I think policing, I think the community demands a different style of policing today than they did in the 2000s. And they said that they are constantly reviewing their methods and updating their training curriculums to make sure that they are producing police officers and troopers here that our communities want and need. I got that as an opportunity that if we see training coming out that might not be fitting our community, I think we could send a memo to them indicating some areas where they can potentially improve, and perhaps we would be listened to. There was also something about broadband that came out. I think John was probably going to speak to that because he had enough bandwidth to download it on his phone. And also, we were able to thank Lisa Murkowski in person for our successful RAISE grant application. The Commandant of the Coast Guard also came through. There was a brief but well-attended ceremony at the American Legion. I think most people in this room have heard of Navajo code talkers. Well, it turns out that the Tlingit and the Tlingit language were also used in World War II as a form of indigenous code speaking. And 4 members of the Tlingit community were honored for their participation in that here as well. So that was pretty neat to be a part of and to realize the massive impact that our local Tlingit code speakers had in World War II as well. John?
Thanks, Mayor. I wish I had more information on the broadband issue, and I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but I would go to CEDA's website for more information or contact CEDA. I think Mr. White was kind of heading this one up. There's an FCC app out there right now where they're trying to measure in communities who is served and underserved by broadband and cellular signals. And I know people are going to say they're being tracked or whatever. I used it. There's no personally identifiable information you can turn off and on. You can tell it how much data you want to go up and down. If you download that app, you can take readings throughout the day and reports back to the FCC, our service levels here. You know, we're supposed to be guaranteed a certain up and a down level on bandwidth, and I purposely wait until a bunch of tourists are in town, and then I take that measurement, and sometimes it won't even connect to the cell signal. So I try to take those measures and make sure we're given a realistic picture of what it looks like here in the summertime. But again, I don't know the date that actually closes. It was a pretty short
I think it was
time frame.
September 1st.
Okay.
So relatively soon now.
Okay. Let's see, strategic planning, that's coming up. It looks like Melissa already left, but we've got Sarah Wilson headed back into town. We're going to be staff, and the strategic planning team is going to be together on Tuesday. I think the assembly was emailed the draft of kind of what we're going to be working from for our next session on Thursday, and that's where we're going to try to get this finalized or I would say a final draft form to come for adoption at the end of September. So there's a pretty quick turnaround that Sarah will have to do, and I'll let her explain that when she gets here, but those sessions are coming up. And last bit is, believe it or not, we're getting close to the end of tourist season, just a few more weeks to go. I think we've got a date, September 15th, where we're supposed to have 13,000 people now in town, which is unbelievable. I don't think we've ever seen that before, but with the issues in Skagway and the landslide they're experiencing at our pier, a lot of the ships started turning this way. So big day, it was a big surprise. I guess that'll be a true test that it's you know, that's one way to go out with a bang, I guess, end the season with that many travelers. That said, stand by for a survey. We're gonna, as we promised, we're working on a end-of-season survey, and then when that survey is complete, we're gonna have a special session at the end of October, asking the community to come out and provide input and hear the results of that survey.
And I would add to John's report about Skagway, in speaking with Mayor Andrew Cremata, that fourth dock that ships are currently diverting from is done. I don't know that it'll ever be utilized again, so we can anticipate some more cruise ships next year, I would guess, coming from Skagway, as they won't have anything in place within the next couple of years to accommodate those boats. Brian?
No report.
Liaison representatives. Sarah?
I don't have a report.
Any other reports this evening? As no executive session is anticipated this evening, or there is none, that will bring us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Thank you for your time, Assembly. We are adjourned.